The fire marshal used the word unrecoverable. He stood in the blackened husk of our server room, gesturing at the twisted racks of metal and pools of melted plastic. With this level of heat damage, Alex, nothing survived. I'm sorry. My name is Alex Mercer. I'm 38 years old, and until that moment, I was the co-founder of a data security firm called Phoenix Archival. The irony wasn't lost on me. My wife, Chloe, stood beside me, her hand on my arm, playing the part of the devastated partner perfectly. Tears traced clean paths through the soot on her cheeks. Everything, she whispered, her voice cracking. Our whole life's work gone. I looked at the wreckage, then at her. I didn't feel sad. I didn't feel angry. I felt a cold, quiet hum in the back of my mind, the same feeling I get when I'm looking at a puzzle everyone else has given up on. I know this is hard to hear, Chloe said, squeezing my arm, but the insurance adjusters are already talking about negligence clauses. They think the fire was because of our old hardware. My hardware. My responsibility. She was already laying the groundwork, positioning me to take the fall. I nodded slowly. Understood. What Chloe didn't know was that my real work, the work that paid our bills and built our reputation, wasn't just data security. It was data recovery. Digital archaeology. I'm the guy law enforcement calls when a suspect smashes a phone with a hammer, throws a laptop in a lake, or, in this case, sets a server room on fire. People think fire destroys everything. They're wrong. Data is just information, patterns of magnetic alignment on a metal disk. And patterns don't burn. They just get harder to read. As the crew started cordoning off the area with yellow tape, I noticed it. A single server drive from our primary backup array. It had been blown off its rack by the fire suppression system and landed in a corner, partially shielded by a fallen steel panel. It was a mangled, scorched piece of metal, warped and half-melted. To anyone else, it was garbage. To me, it was a black box. Chloe was already on the phone with our investors, her voice a performance of controlled grief. I quietly walked over, picked up the drive with a pair of gloved hands, and slipped it into an evidence bag I kept in my car. She never even noticed. She thought she'd erased our life together. She'd forgotten my entire career was built on the fact that nothing is ever truly erased. I met Chloe 12 years ago at a tech conference in San Diego. I was presenting a paper on non-destructive data recovery techniques. She was working in marketing for a rival firm. I was the quiet nerd who could pull a ghost from a machine. She was the charismatic visionary who could sell that ghost to the world. We were a perfect match. A year later, we founded Phoenix Archival. I built the tech, she built the business. Our company specialized in securing sensitive corporate data, but our reputation came from my side projects with federal agencies. I'd recovered financial records from a hard drive found at the bottom of the Hudson River, pieced together chat logs from a phone that had been run over by a truck, and rebuilt a corporate spy's entire database from a handful of shattered microchips. Chloe loved telling those stories at dinner parties. She called my lab the Crypt and me the Digital Ghost Whisperer. It was all part of the brand she was building. For 10 years, it worked. We became the go-to firm for companies that couldn't afford to lose their data. We bought a house in the hills outside Austin, drove nice cars, and were featured in business magazines. From the outside, we were the ultimate tech power couple. Then, about a year ago, things started to change. Small things. Chloe became more secretive about her client meetings, started taking calls in the other room, and put new passwords on all her devices. Just protecting trade secrets, she'd say with a smile. She started working late, courting new investors, she called it. 6 months ago, she brought in a new business development consultant, a guy named Julian Vance. He was slick, confident, all expensive suits, and a perfect smile. He had an MBA from Stanford and a background in venture capital. Julian's going to help us scale up, get us ready for a buyout, Chloe announced in a team meeting. I didn't like him. He talked in buzzwords and looked at our company not as something we'd built, but as a resource to be stripped for parts. But Chloe was the CEO. I trusted her judgment. So I'd watch from my lab as she and Julian huddled in conference rooms, their meetings often running late into the evening. 2 months before the fire, I noticed anomalies in the system logs. Large data packets being transferred to an off-site IP address at odd hours. The address was masked, but I traced it back to a shell corporation registered in the Cayman Islands. When I brought it up with Chloe, she was dismissive. "That's just Julian testing our new cloud backup solution," she said. "Don't worry about it, Alex. I've got the business side covered." I should have pushed harder, but I didn't. I was the engineer, the technician. I had always let her handle the business. That was our deal. But my gut told me something was wrong. So I did what I always do. I made a quiet backup of my own. A deep-level forensic image of our entire system, stored on a private server she knew nothing about. It was a precaution, a habit from years of seeing how easily things could be lost. I didn't look at the data. I just secured it. A digital failsafe. The night of the fire, we were at a charity gala. Chloe was more radiant than I'd seen her in months, laughing with city council members and bank presidents. Her phone buzzed around 11 p.m. She glanced at it, her expression unreadable for a fraction of a second, then put it away. 20 minutes later, the fire department called my phone. Our office building was ablaze. In the car, rushing downtown, Chloe was inconsolable. "How could this happen?" she cried. I didn't say anything. I just drove, the cold hum in my head growing louder. Now, standing in the wreckage with a half-melted hard drive in an evidence bag, I knew this was no accident. This was the final move in a game I hadn't even known we were playing. Back in my home lab, a clean room built into our basement that Chloe dismissed as my hobby space, I began the work. The hard drive was a mess. The plastic casing had melted into the metal housing, and the circuit board was a charred wreck. This wasn't a job for software. This was physical reconstruction, digital archaeology. For 2 days, I worked in silence, using microtools and chemical solvents to carefully separate the housing without damaging the delicate platters inside. The platters, the metal discs where the data actually lives, were warped from the heat. The magnetic surface was blistered in places. To a normal recovery lab, this was a lost cause. But I had tools no normal lab possessed. I mounted the platters in a custom-built, vacuum-sealed rig, instead of a normal read/write head, which would have scratched the damaged surface to dust. I used a magnetic force microscope. It doesn't touch the platter. It hovers nanometers above the surface, reading the faint magnetic fields that represent the ones and zeros of the data. It's a brutally slow process, like reading a novel one letter at a time from a mile away through a telescope. For 3 weeks, I slept on a cot in the lab, watching the raw data slowly stream onto my screen as a chaotic jumble of hexadecimal code. Chloe would occasionally knock on the door. "Are you okay, honey? The lawyers need to talk to you." "Just working on something," I'd reply. She assumed I was grieving, retreating into my work as a coping mechanism. She had no idea I was meticulously rebuilding the weapon she tried to destroy. After 22 days, I had a complete raw image of the drive. It was fragmented, corrupted, a digital jigsaw puzzle with a million pieces. Now, the real work began. I spent the next week writing custom algorithms to piece it all together, using file fragments and data signatures to rebuild the directory structure. First, I found what I expected, the business records. And there it was, a complete record of every core patent and piece of proprietary software we'd ever developed, transferred to that Cayman Islands shell corporation. The transfers were authorized by Chloe, co-signed by Julian Vance. They'd been systematically gutting our company's intellectual property for 6 months. That was the what. Now I needed the why and the how. I focused my search on the most corrupted part of the drive, the temporary files and slack space where deleted data often leaves faint traces. And slowly, piece by piece, I started to rebuild deleted instant messages. A conversation between Chloe and Julian. The first fragments were innocuous. Dinner plans, complaints about investors. But as I pieced more together, the narrative grew darker. "Julian, the final transfer is done. We own all of Phoenix's IP now. Chloe, perfect. Now for the last piece of the puzzle. Alex is getting suspicious about the data transfers. Julian, he can be suspicious all he wants." After Friday, There won't be any evidence left to find. My hands were steady as I read. This wasn't a betrayal anymore. This was a conspiracy. Chloe, are you sure the accelerant won't be traceable? The fire marshal is a friend of his. Julian, it's a custom compound. Burns hot and fast, leaves residue that mimics an electrical short. By the time they analyze anything, all they'll find is a faulty power supply and a negligent CTO. You just have to play the part. I kept digging, fueled by coffee and a cold, rising fury. And then I found the last exchange from the night of the fire, time-stamped just minutes before her phone had buzzed at the gala. Julian, it's done. The phoenix is ash. Chloe, and rising again somewhere warmer. I'm looking at him now. He has no idea. He'll never know what hit him. I lean back in my chair, the screen's glow reflecting in my eyes. He'll never know what hit him. She was wrong. I knew exactly what had hit me. And now I was going to hit back. Not with anger or emotion, but with data. Cold, hard. And, thanks to my efforts, unrecoverable no more. The board and investor meeting was scheduled for the following Monday. Chloe had framed it as a Phoenix Rising meeting, a chance to outline the path forward. She'd sent out a grim but hopeful memo, praising my technical contributions to the company, but regretfully noting that the fire was likely caused by my failure to upgrade critical infrastructure. Recommendation she claimed to have made months ago. She was building a neat, tidy narrative where she was the hero, forced to rebuild after her partner's tragic incompetence. I didn't respond to the memo. I didn't answer her calls. I just spent the weekend preparing. I compiled everything into a single encrypted file. The IP transfer logs, the financial records of the Shell Corporation linked to Julian, and the fully restored chat logs, time-stamped and authenticated. Then I wrote a simple script and embedded it in the presentation file she would be using for the meeting, a file stored on our destroyed cloud servers, which I still had access to. The script was dormant, a digital sleeper agent waiting for a single, silent command from my phone. On Monday morning, I didn't go to the office. I drove to a small cafe a few blocks away, ordered a black coffee, and opened my laptop. I had a secure, remote feed of the conference room's audio and video. I watched as the investors and board members filed in, their faces grim. Chloe stood at the head of the table, dressed in black, looking every bit the grieving but resolute leader. Julian was there, too, standing by her side as her special advisor. "Thank you all for coming," Chloe began, her voice heavy with emotion. "As you know, we've suffered a catastrophic loss. Through what appears to be a tragic accident, we have lost everything. Our servers, our research, our backups, all gone." She paused, dabbing her eye with a tissue. "The physical assets are one thing. But the real tragedy is that our CTO, my husband Alex, was responsible for the hardware. His passion was undeniable, but his resistance to modernization left us vulnerable. I take full responsibility as CEO for not forcing the issue." She was brilliant. In one move, she'd painted herself as a responsible leader, and me as a brilliant but reckless liability. I watched the faces of the board members. They were nodding. They were buying it. "But I am not here today to dwell on the past," she continued, her voice growing stronger. "I am here to talk about the future." She clicked to the next slide, a picture of a rising sun. "With the help of our advisor Julian Vance, I have already secured our stolen intellectual property from a competitor and formed a new entity. We will rebuild, stronger and more secure than ever." She'd just confessed to a crime, framing it as a heroic rescue. The audacity was breathtaking. She had them completely captivated. I took a sip of my coffee. It was time. As she moved to her final, triumphant slide, I sent the command. On the massive 80-inch screen behind her, the presentation flickered. The image of the rising sun vanished, replaced by a black screen with a single green blinking cursor, like an old-school terminal. Chloe faltered. "Just a technical glitch," she said, trying to regain her composure by tapping at her laptop. But the screen was no longer connected to her computer. It was connected to mine. Slowly, text began to appear on the screen, scrolling line by line as if being typed by an invisible hand. It started with the IP transfer logs. Dates, times, patent numbers, and the destination. A shell corporation named Van Sterling Holdings. I saw Julian's face go pale. Next, the bank records appeared. A $2 million transfer from Van Sterling to an account in Chloe's name. One of the board members gasped. Chloe was frantically trying to shut down the projector. The system's been hacked. Someone is trying to sabotage this meeting. But it was too late. The final part of the script began to execute. The chat logs. Chloe, are you sure the accelerant won't be traceable? Julian, it's a custom compound. Burns hot and fast, leaves residue that mimics an electrical short. The room was utterly silent now, except for the soft clicking of the text appearing on the screen. Every eye was glued to the words materializing from the void. Chloe stood frozen, her face a mask of disbelief and horror. Julian, it's done. The phoenix is ash. Chloe, and rising again somewhere warmer. I'm looking at him now. He has no idea. He'll never know what hit him. The final line hung there on the screen, stark and damning. The digital ghost I'd pulled from a fire was now haunting them in front of everyone they had tried to fool. For a long moment, nobody moved. Then our oldest board member, a man named Arthur Pennington, slowly stood up. He looked from a screen to Chloe, his face etched with cold fury. Security, he said, his voice quiet but carrying across the silent room. The payback was swift and total. The board called the police right then and there. Chloe and Julian were escorted out of our headquarters in handcuffs, their tearful protests drowned out by the murmur of shocked investors making frantic calls to their lawyers. The story was on the local news by lunch. Corporate espionage, arson, fraud. The FBI took over the case within a week. Faced with the digital evidence, Julian cracked, telling the investigators everything in exchange for a plea deal. Chloe's defense, that she'd been manipulated, fell apart when they discovered the offshore accounts and her detailed plans to flee the country. She was sentenced to 15 years in federal prison. Julian got 7. The board asked me to take over as CEO. They offered me a blank check to rebuild. I accepted, but on my terms. We rebranded the company from Phoenix Archival to Digital Revenant. Our new slogan, some things refuse to be buried. Business boomed. It turns out, demonstrating in a very public way that you can recover data from a literal fire is the best marketing you can ask for. Our client list doubled in 6 months. We were hired by 3 different government agencies to develop new forensic recovery techniques. I sold the house we'd shared, the one with the lab in the basement. I bought a loft downtown, closer to the new office. I'm still in the lab most nights, not because I have to be, but because it's the one place where everything makes sense, where every puzzle has an answer if you're just patient enough to look for it. Last week, I got a letter from an old contact at the Department of Justice. It was a formal commendation for my role in uncovering the arson and fraud. Tucked inside was a handwritten note. I heard about what you did. Not many people could have pulled that off. You saved a lot of people's investments and pensions. You did the right thing. I pinned the note to the wall in my office. Sometimes, when I'm working late and the city is quiet, I look at it and think about Chloe's last message. He'll never know what hit him. She was right, in a way. It wasn't me that hit her. It was the truth. A truth she thought she could burn, melt, and erase. She just forgot that I was the one person on earth who knew how to read the ashes.